So Dan's going to walk you through an evening of Rainscaping Advanced.
Yeah, we're going through the details of rain barrels, rain garden.
And you may actually get some rain tonight. So
It sounds like you had Rusty Schmidt talk, and he's one of the co-authors with myself and one other person on this guide. And so I'll be talking a bit about using this as a resource. And a little background on myself. I've been in this industry or area for probably about 20 years, working with private companies, nurseries, nonprofits with Great River Greening for 6 years, and then I've been with the state of Minnesota for six years. And I've been focused a lot on different topics related to water. I do a lot of wetland restoration work, and I've been focused on rain gardens and water quality for a long time as well. So those are some of my focus areas. I'm a vegetation specialist and landscape ecologist for the state, and so I do a lot with vegetation, getting into invasive species control and a lot of different issues. So we'll focus a lot on plants today too, looking at different species selection, rain gardens. We try to get a lot of that plant information into this guide, and so we'll be talking about a lot of species that are found here. But really we'll get into the details, and I invite a lot of questions as we go along. We have some exercises that we'll be doing on, that one too. We'll be doing some calculations on rain garden sizing, getting into the details about that. And I talked to Rusty a bit about what he was covering and what he didn't cover, and so I'm going to try to go into a little more detail on some things that he didn't cover quite as much. So you didn't get into kind of the basis of rain gardens, some of the final preparation with compost, plant selection he didn't really get into, and so there's a lot of those types of details that we'll work into and talk about. We'll start off with rain barrel details, construction, and installation. Focus that over there. We'll talk about soils and infiltration. We'll go outside and we'll dig a hole for a percolation test. Got some jugs of water so we can pour the water in there. Understanding rain garden details, getting into kind of the nuts and bolts about rain garden, about conveyance systems for rain gardens, and effective plant selection. So we'll get into the plants, talk about moisture requirements, sun and shade requirements, getting into a lot of the details on the plant side. So with healthy landscaping practices, I think you've probably been talking about these as you've been going through the program. And there's a lot of different techniques. Cleaning up pet and yard waste, decreasing coliform bacteria moving into water bodies, which is important. Shoveling walks and driveways after using salt, try to minimize the amount of salt and chloride going into water. Minimizing the amount of fertilization, only watering as much as needed. Alternative plantings like different alternative turfs like no-mow fescues. Thinking about yard maintenance practices, composting, things like that. And then infiltration practices. And this will be more what we'll be focused on as we go through today. Directing downspouts towards the yard and installing new rain barrels. Using permeable pavers and pavement. We don't get into detail on that today. Improving shorelines with buffer strips, planting drought-tolerant species, and installing rain gardens. So these are all different techniques. So all these in combination can really add up to make a big difference. But today we'll be focused on the rain barrels and rain gardens, getting into the details about installing and maintaining those. So starting off with rain barrels, I guess starting off, do any of you have a rain barrel at your place? A lot of you do. That's great. So you,
and do I like them? Yeah, not so much.
Well, that's good. It's good to get that feedback as well. And as we go through, it'd be interesting to hear kind of your input on kind of how you designed it. Because one thing you'll notice that there's a lot of ways that they're being designed, a lot of different types of barrels, a lot of ways that they're being incorporated into landscapes. And so there's there's a lot of YouTube videos, different things out there as well on rain barrels. And so if you Google that, you can get a lot of good information on rain barrels, how to design your own, build your own, how to put them in the landscape. So they can be reused barrels. These would be purchased ones. But there's a few key things that you'll notice with these as far as how they're designed. The water is dropping in pretty quickly into the rain barrels. This one's going in directly. This one's coming down here. This is a product that's made for diverting water into containers. And so that water source is connected very directly. They'll have a screen. The screen is important, keeping mosquitoes out, keeping all the leaves and material from getting down in there. That can create a maintenance problem, and so that can be something that needs to be checked out with the screen. There's a spigot at the bottom, and so that's where hoses are hooked up. And so the thing with the spigot is you need to get that rain barrel up high enough you're going to have enough pressure. And I don't know if you have experiences with that, having enough or not enough pressure. But the higher you get it up, the more pressure you're going to have. So it's very common that you'll have them up on some kind of bricks, something very solid. And that's important because once these are full, you have about 300 gallons of water in there. And so you don't want that tipping over on a pet or somebody getting too close to it. And so making sure that this is really stable is important.
300 gallons in the...
Or 300 pounds.
300
Yeah. Sorry. That'd be a lot of water. You might get that if you keep adding these together. So, that's one concern, making sure that's very stable. So there's a spigot at the bottom. That's the biggest concern for winter, is that spigot can burst if you don't either open it up or tip it out and drain it.
Is that the same thing as a spout?
Yeah, it's the same as a spout. And a lot of people install these themselves into barrels, and you can get these parts at a hardware store. It's just a usual kind that you'd have on the side of the horse. And then you need washers on either side and a tightener on the back side.
In the winter, I've also had experience with those plastic barrels splitting.
Oh, okay.
So if you don't
and
empty them...
Is that because you had water in it and it expanded? Okay. And I think that's a hazard even with some of the wood ones, that you're going to get so much pressure moving out on those. So. The other design consideration is an overflow. And I don't really see one on this one, but the overflow needs to be relatively large, because if this fills up, you want it to move out the overflow into a location where you want it. You don't want it dumping right next to the house, particularly if there's a basement there. So that overflow is important, and sometimes that gets overlooked. You can see this one doesn't have an overflow. May depend on how large that roof area is, but we'll look at some calculations of how much water can come off even a small roof, and it can be a large amount of water. And so these types of things can fill up pretty fast in a storm.
So for those overflows, is it possible to create a rain barrel that connects multiple ones, just in case if they all overflood together?
Yeah, and essentially that's what they're doing here, is that there is a hose going from one to another, and we'll look at another design for doing that. Some people doing organic gardening will have huge systems where they're collecting a huge amount of water and just connecting up barrels one after another. There's some good YouTube videos on that as well. So there's a lot of different designs. So this would be another one where this has an overflow that's going over to this other barrel, and so these will equalize. And it does have one main overflow pipe then as well, and so these will fill up, and so they'll be at an equalized height. But then once it gets all the way up to the top, that's where it's going to go out through this pipe and out. And you can see here they built a wooden stand for holding up these barrels, and then they have a system hooked up. And this could all be purchased from hardware stores as well to hook all this up, to hook up the hoses to it. And so that in this case they have more than one hose coming off. But again, they have the screen. This is coming close in, so it's going to drop right in, has the overflow. So it has all those other design features that the other ones had. This one could be an issue in the winter. You'd have to open these up and just let everything flow through.
What does that small paragraph entail?
This one here?
Yes.
This is in order to get this enough pressure on this hose to bring the water where you want in the landscape. It's just saying that this has to be raised up.
Okay.
And so they have this standing up, the barrel's up on the stand, so that they can get enough pressure coming out on those hoses and get that out into the landscape. If you're going up a hill, you'd have trouble because you'd be up higher than the barrels. So you just need to get that pressure going. Anybody notice what's wrong with this one?
It's not outside.
Yeah, that's the main thing. It's not up high enough. This is up a ways, so that's one problem. There is one other problem with it too.
Overflow would go through right next to the building.
Yeah, the overflow.
And it's too small.
And it's too small. You need a larger overflow. It's going to get the water away quickly if the barrel fills up, so it doesn't come out the top and dump it. Those are the main things. You can see the overflow on this one. Very large pipe that's being directed out somewhere else. And that could go to a rain garden. That'd be a good place to have that pipe going off to a rain garden.
Could you make that overflow a little more visually aesthetically pleasing by having some kind of a good spout and then a drop down and then have something on the ground where what do you call that, a dry heat bed kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that would be great. And my background is in landscape architecture, so I like those ideas where you can get something that doesn't look so ugly. Yeah, because that's pretty bad. And so you could definitely have something different, some other way to get the water down. And if you did want to move it right into a like a dry creek bed, you could line it with a liner once it's close to the house and try to get it away from the house. And then once it's far enough away from the house, then you could let it infiltrate into the ground. So that's a good idea. And talking about the aesthetics, this is a rain chain coming down. This was actually at Rusty's house, and he said he never had any trouble with this even in the winter. That he'll get ice formation on it, but he wasn't having trouble. But he would be tipping this over, removing the rain barrel in the winter. But here he had a really good slope coming off of here, so he wasn't that concerned about water accumulation right next to the house. So just wanted to review some of the key design features of the rain barrel. What would be one of the first ones for keys to design?
Elevated.
Yep, elevated up, getting it up off the ground. This one doesn't look like it's very high, but that would be one of the keys.
Have a screen?
Yep, having the screen up here to keep the debris from going in the rain barrel.
Overflow?
Having the main large overflow coming off. That one's not very attractive either.
Location.
Yeah, the location is key. We didn't talk too much about that, but you're going to need to have a location where you can use that water, ideally. Here, this one was actually built in a wall, and so it's up a bit, and they can drop the hose off. And then there are plantings in the wall itself, and so that's a good location for having this one because they can reuse that water right away.
little bit about, I have a rain barrel that doesn't seem to have a very big spout, but it seems fine. Do you have like a diameter that you're recommending?
Well, you know, a lot of these that we're looking at, like this one, is pretty typical. About, you know, it's probably about 3 inches of pipe. A lot of the ones that we've been seeing.
Wait a minute, that's
About this
overflow,
size.
right?
Overflow,
Are
yeah.
you talking overflow?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's just, my overflow is pretty small, I think.
Well, it depends on how much area you have coming in. It may not overflow very often, and so if you don't have that problem happening often, you may not notice that as an issue. Or if you have this open at the same time, you're going to be having water come out as well. And so it may be that you're.
I have a small overflow, and when I get large events, rain events, and it overflows, the small overflow outlet isn't enough to drain it quickly enough, and when that happens, it's overflowing out over the top of the rain barrel itself.
I have never noticed that with most. But so you're recommending 3-inch diameter?
Yeah, about
Okay.
that size.
That's helpful.
2 might be fine if.
Mine is 1/2 inch, and it
What?
can't handle it. The house.
Yeah, see, I didn't think mine was.
2 inch, I mean, if you look at plumbing, 2 inch to 3 inch, you can get all those sizes, 2, 3, and 4.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
it's-
helpful.
2 can handle a lot.
All right, so we're going to move on to the rain gardens. Unless anybody has any other
That was
questions.
4 steps.
What was that for?
Yeah, really good.
Okay. Any other steps? Steps with design?
Put the spigot low?
Yep, having the spigot down low, and you know you'll notice that on some of these it's raised up a little higher. This one had it up higher, and so that's okay. But you're just not going to be able to use all the water. You're going to have this part down here that you're really not using, and so having it up higher and having a lower spigot is a better thing than having it like that.
Although one of the advantages of having the spigot a little higher, that that screen doesn't keep out all of the crud,
Mm-hmm.
and so the crud will settle to the bottom of that barrel and not be coming off the spigot as much.
Okay.
So now, of course, you have to clean out the barrel maybe once or twice a year at least.
Mm-hmm. But that's recommended anyway to do that once or twice a year.
When it comes to the rain harvesting, I guess in that picture on the left, where that tube is coming down, what material would you recommend for a screen filter, or I guess the screen to keep insects and other debris out?
Most of them will come with a screen, but if you're building it yourself, you can use just a regular window screen. Would be a good size, because that's designed to keep insects out,
Okay.
and will let the water through fast enough.
Do you think the pattern of how the screen is woven, do you think that would be a factor to keep things out also?
I don't think so. You know, I think a standard screen, it's kind of the usual mesh, is probably going to be good for catching things, letting the water through quick enough.
Okay.
But there probably are other products out there as well that might work.
The other consideration is, especially in a situation like that one on the left where you've got a flexible downspout, that downspout can move around sometimes, and if your screen area is only this big, that downspout has to be aimed right at that screen, and it can't move around, otherwise now you've got an overflow problem. So a larger area of screen allows you a little more flexibility about where the end of that downspout could.
Yeah, a lot of these that we've been looking at, like something like this. It's actually,
That one's probably fairly fixed, so it's not as much
yeah,
of an issue.
that's fixed, probably strapped in. This one's coming straight down to the barrel. That's the ideal design, where you are having it come right down into it and it's fixed there. It's not going to move around. That's a good point. That one here, if it's got a lot of water coming through there, it's going to move around a little bit. And some of it might be shooting off. And again, you want to avoid those water issues next to the house. That's key for designing these types of things to keep that water away. Let's see, I did have one handout on rain barrels. two extra copies.
Did you say most rain barrels are
So then
situated
that's
right underneath the
probably what I meant
downspout,
to
or?
say.
Yeah, usually they are, unless they found some other way to bring that downspout out and into it. So in most cases they are. You know, there are some rain barrels that people are trying to collect water like at a V on their roof. And so that water may be shooting down a bit into the rain barrel. And so they may be collecting water from other areas and something. But usually they're right up there against the house. And sometimes that will help to secure it up against the house. It makes it a little more sturdy.
Yeah, I have a situation where I've got an open-ended gutter, and so depending upon how hard the rain is falling, the rain can fall directly on a slow event. It'll fall directly perpendicular. But if it's a gusher, the rain will shoot off the end and overshoot my rain barrel that's under it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, somebody suggested that I get one of those rain chains,
Oh, yeah.
and that might help to direct it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would help bring it down to where you want it to go.
Yeah.
So you have the gutter up high, and it's
Yeah.
just shooting down.
Yep.
And I can see it being variable depending on how much water is moving through there. So this is out of Chicago, but I thought I had a good summary of some of the things we were talking about, and then it has a good summary of the maintenance. Talking about winter maintenance, make sure your spigot is open, or else tipping your rain barrel over. But if you do that, you're going to need to ideally divert that water in the winter, because you may be getting water coming in there early in the spring, and so you want to avoid any issues there. Keeping your rain barrel lid sealed can be an issue with mosquitoes, preventing mosquitoes.
So that screen, just common window screen, is enough to stop mosquitoes from
From laying their eggs in that,
From laying
in that
their eggs, yeah.
water, yeah.
Yeah, and that is definitely a concern. You know, it's a standing water source, and that's what mosquitoes need to lay their eggs, is a ponded water source. We'll talk a lot about that with rain gardens, but that's what we're trying to avoid with the rain garden. But here you may have water sitting for an extended period.
Also, if you use one of those screens and it's plugging up a lot, that you can get nylon or metal at the hardware store, and heavy duty nylon or not. You can put some mesh that's bigger above that, and just clean that off the stage. So some of those window screens are really small and tight, and they may plug up fast if you have a lot of debris.
It's a great idea. So
For
the
the
bigger
double
leaves.
filtering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Dan, what is your opinion on watering, using your rain barrel water for eating,
For drinking?
food?
Oh, for growing vegetables and so forth?
Vegetables.
Yeah, this list, it's good for watering plants in your garden. I think it depends somewhat on the type of roof that you have. I have an older asphalt roof, and I notice I get a lot of asphalt material coming down because it's just getting old. And so, it's a similar question with rain gardens, because you have this water coming in from different sources. If you have like a tile roof or a metal roof, I think generally that would be okay to use on, like if you have black chokeberries or something, where you're going to be eating that fruit. I think with asphalt roof, I avoid it. I think it's okay to use that water on shrubs, trees, plants where you're not going to be eating those plants. And so I think you need to think about kind of what's going into your individual rain barrel. I don't know if does anybody else have thoughts on that, what you're comfortable using that water for?
Yeah, I'm actually comfortable using it to water my gardens, and I do a lot of vegetable gardening. There's some trade-offs. I think, this is a belief, this is not scientifically based or researched, but rainwater probably has less chlorine in it, and maybe slightly more acidic, which most plants like, than the water that's coming out of your hose faucet, so,
Yeah, there's more micronutrients and things that plants need in that rainwater.
yeah.
So it's a better source for the plants than using groundwater. So there's a lot of benefits to the plants, but I think that, it's an individual decision. See what's coming off of your work.
One of the things Rusty said was the water is up and moving water around. The cleanest runoff anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the roofing material, is that what you're looking at?
Yeah.
The asphalt.
Right,
shingles,
and he
especially
didn't
there.
address that issue. I was just surprised to hear him make that statement.
And I don't know how volatile that asphalt material is. Is it giving off any more?
It really depends on the age of your roof.
Yeah, if they're really crumbling.
Yeah,
big,
like
I
my
think you're
roof
gonna
is
get
giving a
lot
lot of
more.
stuff.
Yeah, mine is too. I mean, when we collect it, it's you look in the bottom of the container, and there's stuff down there, which the water's mixing with that, petroleum products that I'm sure are a result of that. So it's definitely something to think about.
What is a rain chain?
A rain chain, they come in a lot of different forms. Essentially, they're decorative ways of conveying the water, and so there'd be a downspout up here, but then it would extend down from the gutter up there down into the barrel. And it's just a way for the water to kind of will carry along that rain chain.
So it kind of slows the filling up the barrel.
Yeah, it slows the water down. It'll fill up at about the same rate,
Okay.
but it's mainly decorative is the main purpose of it. Instead of having a downspout coming all the way down, that attractive, it's a way to get that water down to something that looks nicer.
It looks like that's going farther in than like when you had the screen and you eave trough like a couple inches above the screen.
Yeah, and he has it going down in there. That way, if it does blow around or anything, it'll kind of within the bounds of where it needs to be.
Is there still a screen underneath there somewhere?
I think Russ used to see how he had that design, but you would see in there. And I think what you can do is have it come down and then the screen, try to get it as tight around there as you can. You may some caulking or something maybe to try to seal that up, because you're going to want that sealed up just to keep mosquitoes from going in there, and so that would be important.
It would also need to be easily removed for cleaning.
Yeah, you're going to need a way
So
to
either the
open
lid
it
comes
up.
off with the screen, or the screen comes off.
And I think that's just designed so that this is the lid that comes off,
Yeah.
I believe. Then everything would stay connected. But as it would. So I know Rusty got in a fair amount of detail about some of the basics of rain garden design, placement, about what areas you would want to avoid because of utilities, kind of avoiding the wet spots in yards, and so do some of that again, but we'll be getting into more detail about the design. And a couple of the key things we'll talk about is with rain gardens. There's a number of things happening. One is that the water is infiltrating, and that's a big benefit of rain gardens, is that we're collecting the water in the garden, and that's allowing the water to go into the ground. Rusty probably showed you a graphic showing how little water we have going into the ground in urban areas and recharging the groundwater. And so that's one of the keys with rain gardens. The plants will also release water back into the atmosphere, called evapotranspiration. And the plant roots are very key as well. The roots are making root channels going down, and we'll talk about plant selection and some of the things you can consider with different species and helping that water go down. But also, the roots have a lot of microbes attached to them. It's a real kind of living system. And so as that water is moving its way through, there's a lot of breakdown of contaminants. They're cleaning water as it's moving down through the system. The sand and the substrate there as well helps clean the water. And so you're getting the recharge, you're getting the water cleaning. There's also a lot of other benefits of having the plants there. Was pointed out there's an article recently on pollinators that's one thing we're really focused on with our agency, is trying to get more pollinator habitat into the landscape. And this is a great article on different species that can be used, and we'll talk more about that as we go along, that all these really add up in the landscape. So more and more of these we get, the more pollinator habitat we have, the more we can clean water, so there can be multiple benefits.
You were telling it was Wednesday, Star Tribune, if you still have it around on the front page of the Variety.
What, last week, Wednesday?
This, what,
week.
yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay, I saw it, but I don't,
The D card name.
yeah, yeah. I just don't remember what it was. Okay.
So we'll look at different designs for rain gardens, and these are, probably some of you are familiar looking at graphics like this, and maybe others aren't, but this is a cross-section looking as if you slice down through the ground through a rain garden, and then also through a road. And so here there'd be water coming off of this road, coming over a grassed area, and then there would be edging on the edge. And so the rain garden has the depression down here. We'll talk a lot about sizing rain gardens. We'll also talk about the importance of having a flat base, because you want that water to distribute evenly there. You don't want it all going to one side. And so that flat base is going to be really important. And then adding compost. Compost is quite often incorporated into the rain gardens. It will help filter out pollutants. It also is good for the plants. And so it's pretty common to be adding about 3 inches of compost, but that'll be mixed into the soil. And then even further down, here it says 1 foot loosened tilled soil, we're digging down deeper and loosening that up and making sure it gets kind of tilled up a little bit, because what that'll do is it'll help get the water down faster, because you'll have a deeper area down there where you're going to have the water moving down through. And so the combination of this, and then you have shredded hardwood mulch up on top, usually 2 to 3 inches of that up above. So the combination of these is what really helps these function well. Here's one other example. The only difference here is that this one has a retaining wall in back. We'll talk about walls and edges as ways to create order within these. And the aesthetics of these is really important, because if they look messy, people aren't going to want to do more of these. And so having these elements can be important. Things like edging, retaining walls. Eye kind of follows those straight lines, and it creates order within these landscapes. So even if the plants look a little messy, those walls and things can help it still look pretty neat. Yeah.
Is that last slide in the book in some significant way?
Well, I don't know if that slide is, but there's a lot of examples of rain gardens with walls.
And I was thinking of the different levels that it showed, you know, the earth and the compost and
Yeah.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I think I know we have some cross sections in here, but not. I don't think showing those levels. So if anybody wants to kind of sketch that out, I'll leave it up there a little longer. I'm going to pass out a handout. Actually, a couple of them. We're getting close to doing our percolation tests to measure the depth of rain gardens, how deep your rain garden should be.
How much compost does it say? 3 inches?
Usually about 3 inches is used, 2 to 3 inches.
Is there a way we can get a copy of this picture? I don't recall seeing anything that detailed in the book.
Maybe it'll be online like the rest of the,
Yeah.
I can send
I didn't see
this
the
out
Saturday stuff yet.
not yet.
and get it out to everybody. So
Okay.
I'll put that together in an email or something and send it out to you.
If you're in an area that's got like really bad soil for some reason, but still perks okay, but it's like really hard packed, like gravel, different things. I mean, would there be any benefit in like digging deeper and putting in amending deeper, like with amended soil? Or
Yeah, you know, this is the design typically for a residential rain garden. And I know some of you will get involved in advising maybe larger systems. You know, sometimes those are called biofiltration areas. And it's pretty common that those larger biofiltration areas that are being built next to commercial sites, they're going deeper. They're going usually about 3 feet deep, and it's very common that they're using what's called an engineered soil. Usually that'll be about 70% sand, 30% compost, something like that. And so they'll go deeper, partly because they're going to have a lot more water coming in off of a commercial site, and so they need to capture that additional water. But then it's pretty common that in that situation they'll have an underdrain. And so if they get too much water coming in there, it'll go off to the storm sewer. They usually try to raise, well, I can draw that. They usually try to raise the downspout up. So in that case, it'd be going down about 3 feet is pretty common. And again, this is for what would be considered a biofiltration area, which is really a large rain garden that is more for commercial sites. This would be a pipe that has holes in it, perforated pipe. And so this pretty common. This is 70% sand, about 30% compost. And this pipe is raised so that as the water moves down through here, it'll keep infiltrating unless there's so much water coming in that saturation will rise up to the pipe, and then that'll have a way to exit so that you're not getting too much water concentrating in this system. But then this would be the same where you have the 3 inches of mulch up here, and then you have the plants growing out of it up above.
How do you keep that pipe with the holes in it from filling up with sand and soil?
Usually the pipe has well, there's different ways they're being designed. Sometimes this will all be rock down here, and this will be wrapped in a landscape fabric. This whole thing will down here.
Okay.
There's also perforated pipes that you can buy that already have a sock on them. And so sometimes that'll be used. You'll see those at Home Depot. You can buy those that have a sock already on them. And that'll keep the soil from going in there and plugging it up. But usually these more constructed systems will have kind of a rock burrito down there wrapped in fabric.
So why the compost rather than just soil? Does it serve any function other than that it's real absorbent? Is there a chemical reaction going on?
Yeah, it's
Improves
really.
plant health.
Is that?
It improves the plant health.
Right.
Yeah, it does really improve the plant health. Now, if you just had pure sand there, the plants wouldn't survive well. So that's going to improve the survival of the plants. Things like peat and compost, they can do a lot of filtering of pollutants. Like if you ran water right down through peat or compost, water's going to be cleaner on the other end, with the exception of dissolved phosphorus, which that is something that everybody's looking at right now, that sometimes you get dissolved phosphorus into the system. And so they're looking at other options. But it does have a filtering effect for a lot of pollutants like heavy metals, things like that will get filtered out as the water moves down through. So that's one of the benefits of compost. So I'll put these together and send them out. I'll see if I can find a diagram showing these biofiltration areas and sections for that. We talked about mosquitoes with rain barrels, and there's definitely something that we need to think about with rain gardens, but a well-designed rain garden is going to filter all the water through within 24 hours. Mosquitoes usually need minimum of 3 days, usually 7, to hatch larvae. And so we're going to be designing these, and that's what we're going to do in the percolation test outside, is design them or plan them so that your water is going to filter out within 24 hours. And so that's a key. And so it's a mosquito trap because they may lay eggs there, and then it's going to dry out.
Has that actually been observed, that mosquitoes have laid eggs in a rain garden and then they dried out?
I don't know if it's been studied, but mosquitoes, in my experience, anytime you have cooled water, they're there pretty quickly, and that they'll come in and lay eggs. And you'll see even little ephemeral pools where you can see the little larvae squirming around. And so, they would definitely come in an area like this and lay eggs. And so that, again, would filter through quickly. And so this is what we'll be doing. We'll be doing this percolation test. We're going to go outside, dig a hole that's about 8 inches around, 8 inches deep. I have my little trowel here to dig it out with. And then use a tongue depressor, put it in the side, fill it with water, and then we need to, well, I don't know if we'll do this tonight, but you'd come back after an hour and observe how far down it went. Because backing up a little bit, right after you dig this hole, usually you fill it with water, let it drain down through so it all gets saturated. We won't have time to do that tonight, but the ground is probably pretty saturated out there anyway.
Yeah.
With all the rain we've had. But we'll dig the hole and we'll fill it with water. We'll put the tongue depressor in there. And then we'll watch it for a little bit and just see how fast that water is going down. But we want the rain garden to drain down within 24 hours. And so if you, in the little diagram here, if you dig your hole, so this is our hole, it's about the size of a coffee can. We put our tongue depressor in the side, fill it with water. If it goes down about 1 inch in an hour, that ultimately means our rain garden should be 12 inches deep. And we have this handout here, and that's kind of talking about the design or how to figure out the depth. And there's an example here. So assume you have a infiltration test, and the water dropped 1/2 inch after 2 hours, and 1 inch after 4 hours. Calculate how many inches of water will infiltrate into the soil in one day.
So there must be an assumption about what the average rainfall event is that you're trying to accommodate here. And there must be some limit so that if you have a 12-inch rainfall in 2 hours, this system won't handle it. But that event is so rare that you've basically accommodated the most common and usual events. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, there's one thing we're looking at, and that is how fast it'll go into the ground. And that's gonna we'll work on this more, but that'll tell us our depth of how deep we want our rain garden. We don't design them to go any deeper than 12 inches because they aesthetically will start looking too deep, and sometimes they can be a hazard. And so the deepest that we'd want to go is 12 inches. Very common that rain gardens are designed to be 6 inches deep. And so if we just determine that based on our soil type, that the rain garden is going to be 6 inches deep, then the next question is how big is it going to be? And so we're going to work on that calculation as well. So the first thing is to do this and then figure out the size.
I guess the 1/8 inch and the 1 inch on that floor, what exactly does that mean?
Let's look at this example. There's one up here. So what we usually tell homeowners that come to workshops is you put your tongue depressor in, and then you fill it with water, and you come back after 1 hour. And you measure how far down it went. And you want it to drain within 24 hours. So let's say it went down 1/4 inch. A quarter of 24 is 6. And so if
but I mean, wouldn't those numbers be switched around there as far as the 12 inch for the 1/8? And yeah, that's what I was confused about that.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
So 1/4 inch.
Good eye.
would be 6. If it was a ½ inch, a half of 24 is 12. Let's say it only went down an eighth. An eighth of 24, 3. Let's say it went down an inch. What would you do? What was that? Well, we don't want to go any deeper than 12, though.
So then what do you do?
You just stay at 12.
Oh.
You have to have an outlet, right? Or,
Well, you need to either make it big enough, or you need to have an outlet,
An overflow.
an
This
overflow.
is not making sense to
Yeah.
me.
Wouldn't
Yes,
it-
I wanna
wouldn't
do
it-
it.
if
It's
it-
gotta
if
be
it-
the other way around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking
The
too.
faster it goes down, or the more it
The
goes down,
shallower.
the shallower the garden you need.
Yeah.
That's what you would imagine.
Yeah.
Well, if you have a clay soil, let's say you have a clay soil, and it's not going down very quickly. You know, it's going to maybe only go down an eighth inch if you have a clay soil.
Yeah.
And the thing we're trying to avoid is having it pond too long.
Right.
And so if you had a clay soil, and let's say you went down 12 inches, it's going to pond for a long time. It's going to hold there. If you have a 3-inch deep rain garden,
Okay, yeah.
it's going to go down within that 12-hour period or 24-hour period.
You just have to
I see.
Yeah.
Clear balance.
So if you have a sand soil, it's going to go down quickly. And you can make it deeper because it's going to go down quickly. You just don't want it
Okay.
ponding there.
Ah,
So that's the confusing part.
Okay.
and
So the
you
better
can,
your soil percolates, the shallower you can, no, the deeper you can get away with.
Yeah. If
And
it's,
if you-
it's percolating fast, you can do a deeper rain garden. If it's percolating super slow, if it's either compacted or maybe you're sitting in a real saturated area, then you're going to need a shallow rain garden. But maybe you can make it larger because you're not going to have it very deep. We'll also talk about
Okay.
plants. Even in a clay soil, the plants can infiltrate or increase the infiltration over time. And so if you have a lot of deep-rooted plants there, that creates channels. And they're finding down in Kansas in areas where they have a lot of clay soil that it's actually increasing that rate because they have plants in the systems. So,
So you want
And
it
in
to be-
any case, you're gonna have to have some sort of overflow strategy for those horribly large events that the rain garden can't accommodate. Is that right?
that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we might, these storms we've been getting recently, well, not so much yet this year, but other years we've gotten really
Last
big
year,
rainfalls.
last spring, we got some really.
Yeah, and so that water needs to go somewhere, and we'll look at that. We'll look at designing that.
and then you could do this test then the day after a big event, big rain event. It should be,
You're gonna have pretty saturated soils down there, and you do want usually fill it up with water first and let it run down there.
oh, I see what you're saying,
Yeah, so but that sometimes takes a couple hours to do, and then coming back and running.
Doesn't really matter, you're testing.
If there was a drought like we had last fall, I would assume you might want to fill it up a couple of times, maybe.
Maybe.
If it's
Yeah.
really, really dry.
I don't think there's a real standard right now on exactly how to do this, but you'll get pretty good results if you fill it up and get it
Oh,
saturated.
she's trying to discourage it.
One other thing, when we go outside, we'll also look at the texture of the soil. We don't get into a lot of detail about soils in this class, but some of the key things are that we're dealing with clay in some cases, sometimes sand, sometimes a loam, which is kind of components of both sand and clay. There's also silt, which is really fine material, and so we'll look at what we get out there.
It seems it seems like it's artificially made. Is that true? Or is loam actually in the dirt?
Well, loam is, it is, we naturally have loam in our soils,
Okay.
but if you go to a garden center and buy soil, usually it's going to be some type of a loam. It's going to have that texture of a
Very
loam.
high in that.
But it'll probably also have more,
Some mix of of all those components,
Yeah.
and some just have more of
Mm-hmm.
one or the other.
Yeah, so the loam is in between these. It'll have some fine particles of clay. It'll have some coarser particles of sand. If you go to Garden Center and buy soil, it'll also have more organic material mixed into it.
I mean, the reason why I asked, because, I mean, outside this, this class, I have my own personal project dealing with water, and I was wondering if loam was actually artificial, because I have an idea of actually using sand for a filtration system, but, I mean, if loam is the mixture between sand and clay, I might have to give that one an idea.
The sand, if it's pure sand, you might have trouble growing the plants in it. It may not have enough nutrients. And so that's where a loam is sometimes better.
Would you recommend that for farming vegetation?
For like producing fruit or vegetables?
Fruit and vegetables.
Well, you could either use a loam or you could add organic material into the sand and try to build up enough organic material. But if your goal is to produce vegetables, a loam is going to be better. You know, that's what most of our agricultural lands are, more of a loam soil. And they let enough water through, but they have enough nutrients in them that loam soil can be good for growing vegetables.
But don't think of your soil as purely one or the other of those things.
Okay. I mean, as far as like, because I have a personal project in building a water filtration system, and I've heard of slow sand filters, but like I said, if loam is just for like vegetation, I'll stick with loam, and then for other things, I'll just sand.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to grow things, the loam would be better. If you're trying
or
to just...
a loamy soil with some sand in it, it's good too.
Yeah. Good to know. Well, why don't we head outside, and we'll find Becky and see where she dug the hole. And I have a plug compressor and a ruler, and I have a couple jugs of water in my car, so I'm going to grab those, and we'll dump them in there and see what happens. Scares me.
Hi, how are you?
Hard doing back. Yeah.
Actually, that's why clay can get to be really tough.
And sand being the largest part of it.
Yeah, that's the largest.
And that could be 12 inches deep. But, well, we'll look at that with when we do the calculation for sizing. You may not want a 12-inch deep rain garden in your yard, or if you're working with somebody else. It may just look too deep, especially if you're designing a small area. You may even not want that to be 12 inches because it's going to be, you know, it could be this big and it's going to go down real fast. So.
Okay. So this example is 1 inch in 1 hour, so 1/2 inch in 1 hour. What's
Yeah,
the
if
time
it went down 1 inch, we're saying it could be 12 inches deep. If it went down only a 1/2 inch in that 1 hour,
1 hour is the.
yeah, this is for 1 hour.
You're just saying it should never be deeper than 12 inches with the 1
Correct.
inch.
Correct. Yeah. So if it went down 1/4 inch, 6 inches deep, it's very common that rain gardens are designed to be about 6 inches deep. That's where most of the residential ones are, because that aesthetically that looks the best. And it may be that you might need to make it a little bigger if you can, because you're not making it as deep as you could. But so those are some guidelines on that depth, and you have this as a guide if you want to refer back and look at how that percolation test is done and how we did these calculations. It confused you at the beginning. So next we'll look at topography, some of the placement things. I know Rusty covered some of this, and some of this will be a little bit of review. But you need to look at what are your water sources. Where's your water coming from? Could be the neighbors, maybe, but usually it's going to be downspouts or a major source. Could be roadways. And I'm sure Rusty talked about the problems with water running steep right down a driveway into storm sewers. And so if you can find a way to intercept that, and we'll look at conveyance systems. to do that, that is great. So any of these impervious areas might be sources, downspouts would be sources. And then looking at where can you intercept the water that's coming down. So you have a downspout coming down here that might have been diverted here onto this roadway, and it might be running down here. Maybe this is crowned, so maybe it'll be running off into this area, or maybe you need to redirect this water maybe into here, or try to get it over here somehow. We might have a downspout here that could come over this way. So looking at your options for, you know, where could you intercept that water and infiltrate it? And then looking at where is it headed to, because that's what you want to avoid, is having it going into the storm sewers. And so if you can find ways to prevent that from happening, getting it into where you want it. Did Rusty go through these calculations with, okay. So here we're looking at a 1-inch rainfall. And a lot of rain gardens are designed to capture a 1-inch rainfall. You can collect more. I know with the PCA, there's some new recommendations coming out to try to collect 1.1 inch for new developments. But that 1 inch is a kind of a good ballpark for what we'll be doing in planning. So if you have a 1,500 square foot house, 1 inch rainfall, 925 gallons will be coming off of that house.
How do you get 925 from 1,500 times 1? Seems like there's a denominator or something.
It'd be, let's see, what's the calculation? Square feet into gallons. I'd have to look up that conversion into gallons from square feet. But essentially, you're getting 4.4, maybe. Yeah, see if that works out. But you know, it's 1 inch of rain over that entire surface area. You could convert the whole thing into square feet by dividing this by 12, and that would tell you how many cubic feet of water would be coming off. And you can turn cubic feet. You could turn that cubic feet into gallons. So 1,500 divided by 12, and then using the conversion, whatever that conversion
It's
is.
7.5.
We haven't had that question before.
7.5 gallons.
What was that?
1 cubic foot equals 7.5 gallons.
So 1,500 divided by 12 is giving you the cubic feet?
Yep. And then you multiply by 7.5 to be gallons.
So 1 cubic square foot is 7.5 gallons, you said?
Yep. 1 cubic foot equals 7.5 gallons.
Okay. So 1,500 divided by 12 times 7.5 hopefully gives you that answer.
Because that's about the same, then 1 gallon weighs 1 pound, or maybe 8 pounds, it's almost the same number.
You didn't?
It's close.
It's close.
I think that's, yeah, and that's
937.
It's 9:37.
I'll have to talk to Rusty about that. So the driveway, 1,000 square feet, roughly 617 gallons. Rusty probably talked a lot about compaction of construction sites and how a lot of the lawn areas are very compacted. And there's a couple inches of soil put down and then sod. And so in a lot of cases we're dealing with areas where water is going to run off very quickly off of lawn areas. And so if that's going to happen, then we have an additional source there. And so a total of 5,400 gallons coming off of this one residential site. And with 30 inches of yearly precipitation, we might pass that up this year. It would be 171,532. This is typical use.
What was that? What
This
number is that?
This is average household use of water. And so it's showing that this number is higher than what we typically would use, that we have
Used for
Could you say,
gardening or?
showers, gardening, dishwashing.
That's the number I've been looking for
could
about
you
the
move
past
that
6 months.
water bottle?
I hope it's accurate.
Could-
What was that?
The water bottle.
Oh, that's annoying. So it is a really huge number of gallons coming off. And so that's where, with new development where they're designed to get the water away as quickly as possible, that's where, roughly that amount could be moving down towards storm drains. And, it's not just any pollutants coming off, it's the volume that's a big problem as well. The water fluctuations it's causing in water bodies are causing aquatic organism problems. Plants have a hard time growing on that, so there's a lot of issues with that. All right, so we'll do a different calculation, and this one is focused on calculating how big a rain garden should be, using the number that we got from the percolation test. And so there's three different scenarios here that we'll look at, and really this math isn't that hard. It's pretty simple. We get down. I'll wait until those go around. We'll look at this.
Can you also send that slide that you just showed with all the calculations of runoff and everything?
Yeah, I can send that too.
Yeah, and if you send me this presentation, I've been posting them online, so
Oh, okay.
all the PowerPoints are online.
Okay, should we just do that? Do you want to just pull them off of that
Sorry?
PowerPoint?
Are we gonna get the stuff from the
Oh,
Saturday
yeah.
class?
We could just
I
get it,
think
yeah.
so. I don't. He
Okay.
hasn't sent the
I'll do that. We'll
PowerPoint
do
yet,
that then.
so
Yeah, 'cause
I'll
I looked and I didn't see
I'll
it.
push him a little bit and see if he'll send that.
I'll just put this onto this computer then.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so first we're looking at, here's a house, and there's a sidewalk coming off, and there's a driveway coming off, and we're looking at this half of the house. So what we're saying is that there's a downspout running along here, and it's coming off there. And it's collecting the water that's running down here. It's getting this water off of here. It's getting all of this water. So this roof area through here is 20 feet by 20 feet. And so you can calculate how many square feet of area this is. So 20 by 20 is 400 square feet. So base times height gives you the square foot of a rectangle. So 20 by 20 is 400 square feet. And so we have that example on here. The rain garden depth, we're saying here that it went down really fast, and that we decided we can have a deep rain garden there. We can have a 12-inch deep rain garden for this area. So to determine the size for the rain garden, and we're planning to collect water from a 1-inch rainstorm. We're trying to collect 1 inch of rain.
Is it okay to divide one type of unit by another type of unit? So we're dividing square feet by inches instead of dividing square feet by square feet?
Let's see. Let me pull this off.
And wouldn't that be 33 cubic feet based on what we record?
No, because it's square, it's not a volume.
But-
Yeah,
But we
we're
looked
just,
at-
we're just looking at surface size, not volume size.
So we have as
That's what we did then.
we have 400 square feet in that rectangle. and we're collecting 1 inch of rainfall. We have that 1 inch, so it's going to be this area of volume that's 400 by 1 inch of rainfall. And our rain garden, here's our rain garden here, going to be 12 inches deep. And so what we're doing is we're factoring in the inches part from the 1 inch of rainfall that's falling down here. And then, so when we do the calculation, it's 400 square feet divided by the 12 inches. And let's see, if we're
That'll give it a cubic feet.
Yeah, 3.5. Whatever is 3.1. Trying to do the algebra on it.
Oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. Square feet times square feet. Equals cubic feet.
X equals,
Okay.
is that right?
So that you get cubic foot volume off the roof and the cubic foot volume in the rain garden.
Yeah. So the inches are crossing each other off essentially. So you're ending up with the square or the size area that you need for the rain garden.
Okay,
I
What's
know
the
that's-
square foot? Not cube.
Yeah, this would be square feet. Yep. That's what we're trying to calculate is the square footage of this area here. And so we're canceling off as you do the algebra the inches, and so you're ending up with the square feet, if that makes sense.
So it's always going to be 400 square feet divided by 12, or 400 divided by 12.
Correct.
Whatever your square footage is divided
Yeah.
by 12, and that's how many cubic feet. And then
No,
Square
Or-
foot.
Square
It's
foot.
both.
Cubic feet and
Yeah,
square
because it's
feet.
got to
both.
be.
Yeah.
Because
Because
cubic
it's-
feet 2 minutes ago when we were looking for gallons.
Yeah, it's how much rain is gonna fill your entire rain garden, so it's the square footage of the rain garden
Right.
filled to the brim after your 1 inch rain event.
Which
Yeah.
Starting with square
which is
feet of
cubic
the
feet
roof.
too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing.
So, as a builder, just remember, if you got a peak roof, you don't measure this rectangle, you have to measure coming down where the rain's falling.
At the base.
Yeah, at the base to the peak.
Horizontal distance.
Pardon me?
Horizontal distance.
Yeah, so
Yes,
the,
horizontal distance
get-
from peak to
you get-
edge.
you got a right triangle, and you,
So you can have a flat roof, and then you're dealing with 20 by 20 is 400. If that roof is 20 by 20 at a steep, it's going to be much less area that's catching rain, so you have to measure that one, this one here.
Still 20 by 20.
Pardon me?
So the measurement's still 20 by 20.
No.
no,
If you had a roof that was 45-degree angle and it was 20 by 20 like this, it would be 12 feet this way. So it's 20 times 12. So it's your area.
It's measured as if you're looking down from straight
Yes.
top.
Yes, or
Yeah.
straight up. So. I
it's
mean,
not like we're going to get up there and measure it.
No,
anyway,
but the
right?
simple way is just to measure, look at the peak of your roof on the ground, and then walk out to the edge of the roof on the
Okay.
ground level.
thank you, because I was always perplexed by that,
Yeah.
and now I understand.
And it's gonna change the
Why,
steepness
and now I
of the
understand
roof.
why I don't have to get up on the roof and actually do
Yeah.
this. Because-
I think it ends up being done both ways, but that is the more accurate way to do it. Because you have water falling straight down,
Oh, more
So-
accurate, it's a lot easier.
that would be the amount of volume of water that would be coming off. So why don't you go ahead and do this, the next one, the second calculation. So we're looking at the gray areas, that area of roof that's collecting water. So we have one that's 20 by 40 and one that's 20 by 15.
I really don't understand what the different formula is based on the depth of the inches. Did we do the first one because we talked about a 12-inch deep rain garden, or because we were looking for square feet? So I don't get, so I have the square feet, but I don't know what to do about 6 inches. I don't understand where in the formula that fits in.
So you divide the roof area by the depth of the rain garden. So first find out your roof area.
Yeah, I got all that.
Okay,
But
and
that's
then you
what I'm
divide
saying.
it by,
So-
what's the depth of this rain garden, this second rain
So
garden?
the 12 inches we used above was about the depth of the rain garden. It wasn't about anything else. 'Cause that wasn't clear. Okay.
So just because 12 inches happens to be also a foot.
Right.
It's like, yeah. It's like yeah.
Thank you.
It's just being lazy.
Oh, wait. Underneath.
So that means that it's
That's big.
That's huge.
Gets bigger.
so that's area, feet square feet area.
13.5 feet by 13.5 feet.
So the one area would be 20 by 40, so that's 800. The other area is 15 by 20, so that would be 300. Adding those together would be 1,100 square feet. And then our rain garden depth is 6 inches, so that would come out to be 183.3 square feet for the rain garden. And this one, we're saying,
How did you get that?
dividing added the 800 and 300 together.
Yeah.
It's 1,100. And then divide that by 6. So you always divide the rain garden depth. Yeah,
I
inches.
did by half a foot. I did by 0.5.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it'd be the number of inches. So the first one should divide by 12. The second one divided by 6. So that'd be 800 plus 300 equals 1,100. To 1,100 square feet divided by the rain garden depth of 6 inches gives the 183 roughly.
Wait, are we doing both the gray areas?
Yeah, both of the gray areas together. Because in this one, we're saying that they're all flowing towards that rain garden. We're collecting all of that water. And so, one other thing to think about with these is that first one, we're saying that was with a percolation test that would be 12 inches deep. But we're saying that it only needs to be 33 square feet. And so that's roughly 5 by 6. So it's not a very big area. And so you probably wouldn't want your rain garden to be 6 inches deep and be that small. So what you probably want to do in that case is make a larger area and maybe make it 6 inches deep. And so you could make it twice that size.
How do you get from the 183.3 to what the dimensions of the rain garden should be?
Well, you can. I guess it's best to do that on a calculator, but you can do a square root of 183 and see what times what equals 183, or
It depends what shape you want it to be too.
10 times 18 would give you that number roughly, because that's 180 square feet.
180 feet? Oh, we haven't done that. But that is.
So there's different variations.
That's really a lot of space.
If you think it's
Doesn't look like there's not that much space
about
here.
8 feet wide, you have to divide 8 into the
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's basically rectangular
Yeah.
shape. Yeah. So my question is, you figured out it has to be 183 feet, now you look at the space that you have, and you don't have 183 square feet, it has to be smaller.
Yeah, that's
So
a,
then it
that's a
has to
great
be
point.
deeper, right?
And Rusty probably talked about this. You know, what we recommend for people is to size the rain garden for your context and for your yard. And so if it's looking like a huge area, you're probably not going to want to design it that big. And so you might design it, you know, if you're looking at, you have your house, and you have your rain garden off to the side. You know, if it's looking like it's just going to be this big area and you just can't fit it in there, then you can design it smaller. And we're going to talk about overflows, making sure that it has a way to overflow. So if you're designing it smaller and you're going to have a fair amount of water coming off your roof or whatever area you're collecting from, that you're going to have a place for that water to go. And we'll look at a bunch of examples of that, of how
So
you
you're
can...
really calculating the ideal size of your rain garden and then looking at the circumstances and saying, okay, now what can we practically do?
Yeah, that's
But
correct.
the solution isn't to go deeper, really, is it?
No.
No,
You're always going back,
percolation test.
Yeah.
always going back to the percolation test because you want it to drain within 24 hours. You know, it's always the overriding goal. You don't want it ponding there for longer. And so you always need to go back to that
So the
percolation test.
solution is an overflow. Is that pretty much what it is? If you have to downsize.
Mainly, or maybe more than one rain garden. You know, you might be able
A series
to
of them.
have one
Or
over
a
here,
s-
and somehow you're
swale
getting
that
the water
extends it.
over there. So there's a lot of, we'll look at some examples of that. There's one example where all the neighbors' yard, rain comes into one yard, and they brought it partly in that, infiltrated in that area, then brought some up to the front of the house, and infiltrated up there. And so you do have options. If you need to design it smaller in one location, you can bring it somewhere else to infiltrate it elsewhere. So we'll look at those
But
examples.
if your circumstances are such that you can only handle a 1/2 inch rainfall, you're still doing some good.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Any
You don't have to do
infiltration
one.
you're doing is gonna be a big help, and that's a good point. Yeah, you can. You know, the majority of our rainfalls are more that size, and so you'd be collecting the majority of those. You just wouldn't be getting the real heavy rainfalls that are coming down. But
So-
you can do a lot of good as well.
I have a question about this picture, because if you look at this picture, and we're saying outside that the rain garden should be at least 20 feet away from the house. This doesn't look like it's 20 feet away from the house.
Good point.
None of these do.
As I was drawing this last night, I was realizing that I'd have a hard time fitting all these on.
Yeah.
So I do them closer, and so they're just hypothetical.
It's
to that.
schematic.
Oh, there's
it's
no
not
basement,
to
though.
scale.
There's no basement. It's an Arizona house.
No basement in this case.
Didn't I last week say though 10 feet?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, you know,
So there's different.
the guideline used to be 10 feet. And it was raised, some concerns were raised that people thought they may be getting some sweating on the inside of foundations with the 10-foot distance. So everybody kind of automatically switched to 20. So ideally it's somewhere in there. You know, it's going to depend on the soils and how water flows on the site. If you have a sloping area and it's moving away quicker, you can probably be a little closer. But we tend to use these general numbers, you know, especially if we're working with homeowners, to make sure, you know, if you have a basement, just stay 20 feet away. But it's not that simple. It really depends on your condition of how far away you can be. And we'll look at some examples of rain gardens where they have a slab and they're putting it right by the slab. And so there's a lot of variation in how these are done and how comfortable people are with placement. We did have one other calculation here. Why don't we go ahead and do that one as well. So this one, we have 2 impervious areas. This one includes a driveway this time. So we have the driveway that's 30 by 15 and a roof area that's 15 by 20.
So what's the square footage?
Decent size. Yeah.
So that 15 by 20 would be 300 square feet. And the 30 by 15 would be 450 square feet. So if you add those together, you get 750 square feet. Divide that by the depth of the rain garden, which is 3.
Just do, I have to use the square root.
You get 250 square feet. So that could be, 25 by 10 is the simplest to look at. Well, we're looking at a pretty large area again. 25 feet is pretty good size. And here we're saying we hit a clay soil, and it went down really slow.
Is that what that picture is? 'Cause I've been trying to figure that out. Like, what is that circle?
Well, that's just
That's a
showing.
tree, right?
Oh yeah, there's a tree there. Yeah,
Okay.
those are funky trees.
I'm hip
Oh,
now.
these are trees. Oh.
Yeah.
Those were the gardens?
I thought it was a type of.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I know, that's what I figured when you were talking about the elbows, yeah.
That's what I thought. I thought it was just like dirt or something.
Oh, have to work on those trees a little more.
I knew they were trees.
It's an aerial view from the top.
It's a very stylized, simple.
First look at that.
Landscape architecture tree.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll move on. Looking at other design considerations. So looking at the context, Rusty probably talked about some of these. Looking for utilities, you want to stay away from those and make sure you're getting those marked. Locating all structures, determining property lines and easements. You don't want to put it on the neighbor's property. Identify any local ordinances affecting projects. Usually that's not a concern for most rain gardens. They're going to be within your landscape. Not going to be any different than a normal garden.
If it's not too much trouble, could you flash back to the topography and hydrology?
Sure. So water sources are covered. Identifying the high and low points. Again, you may not want it in that lowest point because you may not have a good outlet from that low point. Paths of concentration, interception points. Looking at where the water is going. We didn't talk much about what's in the water. We've talked about that with using rain barrel water, but sometimes you'll get water that'll be diverted off of roadways. You're doing curb cuts. So in those cases, you're getting whatever might be on that roadway. So it could be petroleum products, could be material off of brakes. A lot of phosphorus settles onto impervious surfaces. That might be flowing in. So you may get different materials coming off of a parking lot or a roadway than you might get off of a residential area. But you could have fertilizer or something coming off of the residential location as well. Could be salt. And then lawn chemicals. That's definitely a concern, especially if you had water flowing off of a lawn that was treated. Could have some impacts to the plants possibly. So those are all considerations.
So if the soil really does take in a lot of water, you're still going to get a lot of fertilizer that's put on lawns. A good percentage of that is going right off the lawn, isn't it? In a decent manner.
Stop fertilizing that lawn.
Yeah, but I mean,
That's right.
it seems to me most of that's going to be going. It's not going to be settling in very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And we recommend if somebody is going to fertilize that they do a soil test first. That they make sure that they really do need to fertilize, because you may have high nitrogen and high phosphorus already. You might be fine, and in most cases that's true, especially with phosphorus. Most of the areas in the metro area have plenty of phosphorus in soils, and so they banned it in a lot of places because you don't need it and it is a pollution source. So yeah, in most cases, fertilizing isn't really needed. And if you're creating a rain garden down here, and you get a big rainfall, you're going to get fertilizer moving in.
Your clippings are coming off your lawn in a decent rain, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, telling people to keep it off the sidewalk, it's coming off just as fast off your lawn. So.
What about top dressing with compost lately on grass as a fertilizer? Does that work?
Yeah, people definitely do that if they have lawns that are kind of low in, I guess, phosphorus. If it's low in phosphorus, that might be a source, and then also some nitrogen would be added by that. So I think that would work. You know, you're raising the level of your lawn each time you do that a little bit, so that may be a concern. But if you have a really weedy lawn that has like a lot of plants in it, or maybe has a lot of clover. Sometimes those are indications, in the case of clover, that it's low in nitrogen. With the plantain, it's just generally low in nutrients. So if you mostly have weeds in your lawn, adding some compost in there can be a way to reinvigorate it and try to get more lawn grass growing instead of having weeds in there. There's a whole, people that study lawns and study how to maintain healthy lawns. Well, there's also a whole group that is studying how to do it more holistically without other inputs, and there's organic lawn companies, and so they're studying those things, trying to figure out how can you do that.
What was the they use?
Yeah, common plantain is a really wide leaf plant that grows in lawns a lot. It sends up a little spike. It's actually edible, so I remember. Yeah, it's kind of shiny green. It's a really good edible, but it's considered a really weedy thing. So. Yeah, creeping Charlie, again, that can be a sign of poor nutrients. We get that a lot in floodplains where there's real silty, sandy soil, and it does really well there. So it's a sign that you maybe have a sandy, low nutrient soil. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Yep. So locating the gardens, I know Rusty covered that somewhat, but we'll look at a number of examples.
Can you go back to the one right before this again?
So I identify existing vegetation. A lot of times with planting vegetation, we're thinking about what you're planting, is it fitting in kind of with the neighborhood and what else you have on your lawn. Looking at locations of utilities. Identifying structures, usually that's put onto a plan, property lines and easements, and then any ordinances.
That first line, identify existing vegetation, work with your local existing plateau, would that just be already plants that are already in there, like weeds and whatnot, dandelions, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, you need to identify that, kind of what the weeds are. That might be a problem, so that's good to identify. But then also, what other plantings do you have around your house or in your landscape? Trying to think about designing to kind of fit that context. If you have, what would be a good example?
Hostas.
Yeah, lots of hostas. You have a really shady site, or ferns. Maybe kind of repeating some of that in the rain garden. It's usually, I don't think it's usually a problem that your rain garden looks that different than your other areas, but I think as a design consideration, sometimes it's good to try to work your rain garden into your landscape. And so trying to fit it into existing beds that you have so that it doesn't look like this area that was just kind of put out there by itself as this little element in the landscape. And we'll look at that as we look at some examples of where that kind of looks that way maybe a little bit, and maybe where it was incorporated more with walkways and things like that.
So in my case, none of my vegetation is highly designed. It's all sort of random and kind of weird, odd, wild looking. So I probably don't want to have a highly designed rain garden either.
Yeah, maybe not. If everything is kind of more loose looking, more English garden looking, you may not want this formal French garden out there. So yeah, those are good considerations. So, here's a lawn, there's a downspout coming down, they flag. I believe that's flagging the utilities. Here's the road up here. A lot of times, rain gardens will be incorporated along hard edges. It's kind of creates one edge for your rain garden already, and so you'll see that fairly often in the pictures that we'll be showing, that they've incorporated into that edge in some way. So the 10 and 20 feet numbers. So for the residential yards, 6 to 9 feet depth is very common. Mentioned that a few times. 8 by 10 is a common size for one downspout. And these are things that we tell homeowners a lot. This is a kind of common size, 8 by 10. If you want to make it bigger, you can. That's great. If it has to be smaller, that's okay. Just getting rain gardens in the landscape is what we're trying to do. It doesn't have to be sized exactly to get 1 inch rainfall. We're just trying to make it work within landscapes. And as we work with homeowners, they have a lot of considerations going on there. And so thinking about where it's going to fit best is important.
I have a question about that one. It's hard to tell from a photograph, but it kind of looks as though there's it's terraced, but the landscape that it's in probably slopes down toward that concrete area or road area or whatever.
Yeah, you can actually see a pipe coming in here, so this is where the water is coming out into this one. So they're actually piping it from further up in the landscape down into this garden.
Okay.
And this is in with the other landscaping, so this is a case where it's going to fit well. This is a pretty small rain garden here.
I might be able to incorporate my rain garden into the slope that I have at the end of my yard and kind of kill 2 birds with one stone because I hate mowing that slope.
Yeah, that's a great place. Slopes are a great place for rain gardens.
Really? Okay.
You're leveling it out. You're usually getting a berm up in front. You're moving the soil, taking that soil and you're scooping and moving it forward, making a berm up in front. And you can have a wall in back. Not essential always to have a wall in back. We'll look at examples of that. Well, let's look at this first. So we went through, did a percolation test, and decided how deep we wanted our rain garden to be. And so this one is going to be 9 inches deep based on the percolation test. And this is a slope. So here's a slope coming down. This line shows that where that slope was. And so what happened here is they took this soil, moved it up here, made a berm. And that berm is usually has wood chip on it as well. Here this is more of a flat situation, but you're still gonna, all lawns are graded to keep water moving away from the house. And so you're still gonna have a bit of a drop coming across. Should be, yeah, not in every case. So you're gonna have some drop, and here you have water coming in. And this one's pretty flat, but you're still gonna have that outlet. You're gonna have the low end, where you're gonna have the water coming off. But the one thing you'll notice in both of these is that this base is planned to be totally flat.
So with that middle depiction of the rain garden, would we use that equation for area calculations for triangles, since it's kind of in a triangular form?
Well, your area would be how to explain that? This is just a cross section looking at. This is kind of cut away, cut the slope away.
Yeah.
And so the actual, this would be kind of the pooling area of your rain garden here. It might come up this high and level out. In a big storm, maybe it would come up and go over the top here. And so your sizing calculation would just still be the entire size of your rain garden. But this is, showing how you can just move some of that soil up in front. But you probably use maybe up in here to over here to measure your size of that garden.
So on the lower one, it's where the blue line is. That's how you're measuring your square foot size of the rain garden, rather than
Well,
Yeah.
again, this is something I think is done a little differently by people. Ideally, you'd be measuring about the midpoint of the slope
Okay.
to truly get to the right size, square footage, because it could get up this high. And so you kind of, let's see, I don't know how to describe that. You need to cut that triangle out because you also have this area that you can use. So you'd be up to here and up to there, about midway up your slope, or measuring that garden size. And getting it totally flat is really important because you don't want it pooling in one place. You're not going to get good infiltration happening. You're going to have it saturated in one spot. So you want it smoothing out across the whole thing. So you can use a line level. That's kind of the cheapest way to do it. It's a little tricky using these. I don't know if many of you have experience using those, and you really have to have that line tight. And ideally, when you're trying to get the base flat, you're moving around, testing different spots on it. These laser levels work really slick for doing that. You can just move around with a pole, and it'll tell you when you're level.
What about a big old-fashioned carpenter's level?
Yeah, I've used those in the past for rain gardens. Again, it's a little tricky because it's best to have the long ones.
The longer the better,
So,
yeah.
Yeah, the longer the better.
Instead of buying an 8-foot level, take an 8-foot straight 1-by.
Yeah.
And put your
the
4-foot level on it, and
Yeah.
it's much cheaper. Because you don't want to buy an 8-foot level.
Right.
You can even do it with a 2-foot level and get an 8-foot piece of lumber. But
Yeah,
get your
but you
lumber
might- yeah,
to
gotta
make
be-
sure it's straight.
Yeah, okay.
Just look straight down, and you can tell if it's straight. And we use those long boards for doing patios and things too, and those work well. And yeah, you could lay that level on there and just keep moving it around. And just you can kind of use it to scrape a bit too if you use a board to try to scrape away areas that are a little bit high.
What's the fancier one called? Did you say?
It's called a laser level. And those will have, there'll be a picture of one coming up where they're using a pole and they have the station set up and it has a laser that's shooting out. And so that you can use to move around in different spots and make sure you're totally level in the spot.
Can you rent those?
You can rent those.
Might be better than buying if you're only going to use it once.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, those are really
I think
expensive.
we should get the watershed district to buy one and then,
Pass it around.
The community level?
Yeah.
The community's on a level.
I'm just wondering, since you're emphasizing this point so much, what happens if you don't get it level?
Well, it'll move to one end typically, and so it'll pond there. It's a risk maybe that it'll pond too long there, that it might go beyond that 24 hours. So you could maybe, it's probably not going to be there for 3 days or so, but again, we're trying to really avoid that, having it pond in one spot. And then it's just not going to infiltrate as fast. And then if you have plants there, usually they don't like being that wet more than 24 hours either.
Yeah, you're gonna drown some plants and
Yeah.
starve the others.
Yeah, and we're not putting wetland plants in these. We're usually putting more like prairie plants, plants that like medium soil conditions. So, that's the other risk, is that you're gonna have unhappy plants. So here's a rain garden being installed. I think this one has a video, I think, on the Metro Bloom's website. Really good video showing the steps of this one being installed. So you can check that out.
Metro Blues.
Yeah, Metro Bloom's.
What does double dig mean?
Double dig is, we talked a little bit earlier about digging down about a foot deeper and loosening up that soil. And so that's, you'll dig the depth that you're supposed to go to, but then you'll go deeper. You'll dig another foot down and loosen up that soil.
Oh, I see.
So you dug once and then you're digging down again.
And the second digging is really more like tilling what's gonna stay there. than it is digging it to remove it.
Yeah, and it may involve, well, you may need to dig a little deeper if you're going to add compost in.
Yeah, okay.
So if you're going to add 3 inches of compost, you want to dig down 3 inches deeper than your rain garden depth.
And remove that additional 3 inches
Remove
to
that.
replace it with.
Yeah, and then it's good to mix that compost in with a garden fork or something and get it incorporated into that soil. Because you don't want a layer of compost and a layer of soil. Your plants aren't going to like that either. So here's a sod kicker. Those can be rented. You know, and there's sod cutters, big gas-powered sod cutters that can be used. Or you can just use a shovel and scoop it out.
Can you rent the guy that comes with that?
They're really bad. If you don't, you can mash your shin up really bad with those.
Right.
Wear heavy boots and maybe
Which
even
one?
shin guards.
No,
the sod.
This thing.
Okay,
really?
I'm serious now. I'm
manual.
renting the guy too. Is that?
They're really nasty. They
And
can be
escapes?
really
Eco-escapes.
shovel if you miss.
Eco scrapes or eco
Ecoscapes. Craig Start.
Yeah, and I've done it a lot with shovels and just scooping it. But the benefit of these is that you can roll this out and reuse it if you have a spot.
There may be pulling it. It looks like on this one. Is that how it works?
Well, usually there's a bar there, and you can kind of just kick at it. I haven't used these, but yeah, there's a bar up in front, so it's
I
kind
think
of a
he
kicker.
just, the string got caught in that picture, so he was just pulling the string out of the way.
Oh,
So in
okay,
that picture.
okay.
What does overdig soils mean?
Well, there's a little overlap
just-
there. The overdig is you're digging down further, and
Oh, okay.
so the double dig could be considered for the compost, and then over digging, you're digging down that extra foot, and you're loosening that up. But the other thing with that is you got to make sure that once you've done that, you don't walk all over it again and squish it back down. So once you have that loosened up, we'll talk about that. So here they're removing that sod, digging the rain garden down. So a lot of times this soil could be used as a berm along the edge if you have a slope. Other times it'll need to be moved somewhere else.
Yeah, what do you do with too much soil that you haven't got a place for?
Well, the berms are nice for that, but yeah, if you need to move it somewhere else,
put it on the boulevard and say free.
yes, your neighbors
It'll
want
be
it.
gone.
See if anybody else will take it. There are places within each city. The compost facilities quite often will take soil as well.
Okay.
So you might need to call wherever you live to see if there's a location.
Does anybody
with
know
the
if
city
the
there.
city of Minneapolis, now that they take your yard waste, does that include soil?
I don't think
I
so.
don't know,
it
you
does.
have the
No.
closest dump site is Maple Grove. in Colorado.
Yeah.
It's taking soil right now.
Oh.
But there are private places that
You
will
can-
take
you
it.
can put it on-
pay to have it.
And you can put it on
what
Craigslist that you have free soil and it'll be gone. Because people are doing projects and looking all the time. We had clay and somebody came and got it because they were doing a big display of African sites or something and
That's a great idea.
who knows?
So when you do your perk test where your rain garden's going and then you dig down 12 inches, wouldn't your perk test change then possibly, especially if there's lots of fill? And just,
Yeah, it could. When they do these big biofiltration areas, they're doing cores going much deeper because it's a much bigger deal if you're trying to design a big biofiltration area next to a commercial site that you need to make sure that that thing's going to function just right. For a residential site, if you're feeling pretty confident with that upper 8 inches or so, most sites in the urban area, if you have compaction, you're going to have it within that 8-inch zone. And it's not real common that you're going to start getting down into a gravel layer or a bedrock layer or something else there on a residential lot. So usually that's enough to do that 8 inches. If you had concerns, I suppose you could do a 2-foot deep percolation test, calculate how that would work out. There's ways to modify it if you had concerns that you're going to hit something different down there. So yeah, you can do that.
What's,
It's more common that you'll have loam on the top and then you'll hit sand. Is a more common scenario. Yeah.
what's like the smallest rain garden that would make any sense? Like if you have a small space?
I don't know if there is
Oh, okay.
a really a minimum size. Any depression is going to help collect some water and potentially have a benefit, especially if it's going to flow off into a storm sewer. So, you can also have a whole bunch of little ones kind of scattered throughout the landscape if they're kind of going to flow one into another. There's a lot of things you can do that are pretty creative. So I don't want to discourage people from doing small ones because it might all be part of other things they're doing. They might have other garden beds that are going to help filter water in. So there might be a whole bunch of things happening, and so maybe that one is just part of a number of other things that they're doing. So I don't know if there is a...
Would there be any benefit in setting like the upper like black nice topsoil off to the side and then over digging and putting that back into the bottom? Work, but
yeah, I think if you're, especially if you're getting down there and you're hitting sand, that's where I think there might be a benefit of pulling some of that sand out, bringing some of that topsoil back in, and then your plants are going to do better at that than they would in that sand. Because if you had that pure sand underneath, you probably want to add a lot of compost into that and try to get it in good condition for your plants to survive. And so I think that would be a good idea in that case. Yeah, why don't we do a break? That's a good idea. We're at a little after 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock.
6 o'clock, yeah.
So we have another hour.
And then why did that guy have to have his front towed?
Oh, somebody came by and flipped his front of his truck and then hit run, left the seat, and it bent so he couldn't drive it.
All right, I think we'll get started up again since we have about 40 minutes left. We're still moving through the steps of this rain garden. So they poured down that compost. So here they're raking that compost in, getting incorporated into the soil. Here's Rusty with the laser level. So you can walk around with that. You can tell when it's at the depth that he wants. And then this is a key point here. So we've gone through, we double dug it, made sure that all that soil is loose. So next the mulch goes on before any planting happens.
Now, I don't like that system, and I want to know why you want to do it that way. Because once that mulch is on there, and I want to install the plants, now I'm having to scrape the mulch away, dig a hole, and get that soil out of the hole for the plant, and then it's getting mixed into the surrounding mulch, and then I try to put that soil
Yeah,
back
I agree. It's a bit of a problem. But I usually,
So
I guess what I do to try to
mulch.
avoid that is I'll walk around with one of these buckets and put all my soil in there as I'm digging a hole because I don't want it getting mixed in. But the reason that's going on there is that it's really easy to recompact that soil by walking on it.
And do you think the mulch prevents that?
Yeah, I think it does a pretty good job of preventing that. They actually do this in like logging operations, like up north. They'll put down heavy loads of wood chips before they run over it with heavy equipment so that those wetlands don't get compacted. And so they're using this technique, this method in other applications. And so it's just distributing the weight more. It's going to get compacted a bit. I don't think you can avoid that.
What's the purpose of mulch anyways?
You're small enough, you won't.
There you go. Well, the mulch, the mulch is a good question because you don't absolutely need mulch, but to prevent weeds from coming in is usually why that's being put down. double or shredded hardwood mulch is usually what's used because it kind of binds together pretty well, and it's not going to float up very easily. Like pine bark or pine chips or even other kinds of bark are going to float up pretty easy. And so the shredded hardwood will stay put pretty well in that rain garden. But there are other options. We almost always recommend the double shredded so it doesn't float up. But you could even just not have any mulch in there. Some people like kind of as they do their maintenance in the fall, cut up the plants and let that material drop down in the garden. Some of that will float up, but others will kind of get bound up and stay there. So you could look at other options, but that's double shredded or shredded hardwood is what we tend to use most.
So
where do you get that?
The city has different sites where their tree trimming crews go around and shred, and then they deposit those. They're in demand. But my question was, is most of that hardwood, and you wouldn't really know.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's hard or softwoods, but the thing about the mulch that you can get, the shredded wood that you can get from the park board is they're not interested in double shredding it. They're just taking the tree apart, and you can get a range of sizes of chunks in there, and there's twigs and bark and leaves. All kinds of,
So you want it pretty fine.
Well, you want it uniform, or relatively uniform. So it doesn't have to be fine, but you don't want all different sizes of chunks.
I don't recall ever seeing on a mulch bag that it said double shredded. So
it's more common that you can get it from nurseries, that they'll have piles of shredded hardwood mulch. A lot of nursery places that'll have like different piles where you can go and get larger amounts. It seems more common. If you go to a gas station or someplace that has bags, less common that you'll find that. You'll find cypress mulch and pine bark, and you'll find some things that are very common out there. So you may have to look a little harder, call around to some different nurseries to find that. But you are using a fair amount for a rain garden, and so you might be able to go to a nursery with a pickup or maybe
who's got the pickups?
a rain barrel, or not rain barrel, a garbage bucket or something that could be in your car. You can put it in there, put a tarp in your car, put it in there. There's different ways to try to get it to your site.
If you've got neighbors that are gardeners and you like their gardens, go ask them what they use and look at their gardens and see, what it looks like and how it feels.
Yeah, I don't have that problem. I don't have. Where do you find this stuff?
In the stuff from the city, I think that would work okay in most sites.
We use patio tum. At patio tum, you can get it's called the Eco Bales, and they're tightly compressed bales of compost that you can just they're bound together. You just pick up and put like 10 in your
compost or mulch.
Sorry, mulch, but it's double shredded hardwood mulch, and they're Eco Bales.
Where is that?
Patio
tum.
I never heard of it.
That's. Is it in Burnsville? Is that where it is?
Oh, that's why. It's very compressed mulch, so you have to kind of pull it apart, shred it apart, but they're easy. They're 50-pound bales. They're easy to transport.
Well, so they kind of work like straw bales. It's hardwood instead of straw.
And they're smaller. They're cubes.
Huh.
So they expand when you take them apart, Becky?
Yeah, they don't really expand. You have to break them off a bit.
But then they're
very compressed and they're easy to transport.
Yeah.
That's a local source, which is good.
Right.
If you're like cypress mulch is coming from Louisiana, way down there, and so a lot of shipping. If you're trying to use a more sustainable material,
So how about when you get these prairie plants going and they start, they grow up, we've got prairie plants in our front garden, and they grow up and then they die off, the top does. And my inclination is just to leave them, maybe knock them down in the spring and leave them as mulch. Or where my wife wants to take them all the way and put them from somewhere
That's
else.
probably an aesthetic issue.
Right, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But is it okay, at least, because I'm gonna have my garden and I'm gonna do what I want in my garden. And so would that be an okay strategy? I mean, that's how prairies are naturally. They just fall over and then that turns back into soil.
I like to take pruning shears and I just start at the top and I just chop them up real fine.
And in the spring more?
Yeah, usually in the spring when they're starting to grow again. You know, they have nice winter interest and then you can just chop them up. And then it makes good mulch. Some of it might float up, but others will kind of incorporate in there. So.
Thanks.
So they're laying the plants in place here where they want them put. 18-inch spacing is pretty common for rain gardens. Kind of depends on the species and whether it's going to spread out, and there's a lot of aesthetic issues there about spacing. But 18 is pretty common. So here's a double shredded hardwood, compost, and then plants. There's different sizes. These are both being considered plug sizes. They're pretty small. They usually cost $1.30 or somewhere around that. Usually not too much over $1. This would be a 4-inch container. There's also gallon containers. So you might be moving from like $1.30 to $2.75 to maybe $8 for a gallon. And so you're paying a lot more. But these planted in the spring, if they're taken care of, usually get to almost adult height that first year. So usually that's our preference.
Yeah, because it's cheaper and they will catch up. You only need to buy those big plants if your customer wants an instantly finished looking garden.
Yeah. But this is a concern if you have ponding too long. So again, that's why you want to make sure it's draining down well. If the water level gets up above these, they probably won't survive. If it's for very long, if it's for a few hours, they may not make it. So here's a rain garden being dug with a backhoe.
That's what they mean by overdig.
That would overdig. But again, this one's right up against a walkway slab here, so they're getting pretty close to that slab. They're feeling okay with that. I think this was one of Rusty's projects, I believe. Laser level, getting it totally flat. You can see they used some of that soil on the berm here. They cut some area on the edge for edging, I believe.
Well, that's interesting that the berm is like inside that.
Yeah, you can use some of that water, you can use some of that soil for that berm and just build up in a little extra big or larger berm as a way to use up that soil. So you can definitely do that. You're going to cover it with mulch. And actually, I don't think they're using edging on this one, but it is a good idea to kind of cut a line down there that your wood chips are going to catch on, because you don't want them just dispersing onto your lawn, and that'll help them stay.
Can you also use rocks as a substitute?
Yeah, you could use rocks as well. The thing with rocks is that usually you need a erosion fabric underneath them to prevent weeds from coming in, because you get quite a bit of light coming down through rocks. So you'll need some kind of fabric over the top, and then there would have to be a fabric that lets water through easily.
And boy, weeding in rock mulch is no thing.
Yeah, and it seems like people end up taking rock out fairly often because over time soil will build up in it, and you just keep getting weeds. And then if you don't just keep using herbicide or something,
Vinegar.
Haven't tried
Agricultural grade vinegar.
Costco
If you ever want to take them out.
That's all I use.
Personally, I would like to refrain from using wood, just for personal reasons.
Okay.
But I just thought
Well,
straw is an option.
Yeah, straw might float, but if you're using it up on the upper edge here,
Oh,
that'll
yeah,
work.
and it tends to bind too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are erosion fabrics with straw in them, so that some type of fabric would be an option. But if you're looking for the most sustainable material, there maybe if you have a source of like prairie grass or something that you can cut up real fine, maybe that could be used in the garden if you're looking for something really local. Laying the mulch down, then putting the plants in place. planting. Again, I like to carry around a bucket to put the soil in and then dump it back out, so I'm not mixing it in. Make sure you're watering good. Sometimes I'll stick the hose right down in there and you get it shrubs watered really well. Okay, now we're going to look at conveyance systems. There's a number of conveyance systems that can be used. This is a dry creek bed, and we did talk about that a little bit with rain barrels, that sometimes you can start a dry creek bed right next to the house and have a rain barrel right there, but you'd want to have it lined underneath until you get your 15, 20 feet away from your foundation. But once you get far enough away, then you could let it just soak into the ground. And so that can be one way of getting water to a rain garden through a yard.
Did you say have it lined until you get it? Oh, is that what you're
Yeah, you
saying?
can use a liner, like a pond liner. Sometimes just a heavier plastic will work, but you don't want it to be, if you're using this, I've designed sites where we've had water dumping right down into a creek bed like this, and it right off of a building, and so we don't want it to infiltrate there.
Right.
So we lined it, coming out.
Okay, so this part of it, like the part closer to the house, is where you put that line.
Yeah. And once you go out further, it doesn't matter as much, unless you're, for whatever reason, you really want a lot of water coming to your rain garden. But so it's probably okay to have it infiltrate otherwise.
If you had a lot of clay soil, doesn't clay kind of make a liner to some extent?
Yeah, it can. If you have real heavy clay, it's not going to infiltrate much. If I had a basement there, I'd still maybe line it for a ways, but that may convey it pretty quickly. So there's a lot of different methods of getting water out to sites. This isn't the most attractive, but they're getting water out to the rain garden.
There's. I can't tell from here. What is
this?
This
is just like a piece of half downspout.
Oh,
You can buy these at Home Depot, Menards, places like that. Yeah, just kind of like gutter material that's extending out. Here there's a catch basin box. I have one here. It's this. The key design thing with these is you need something compacted really well underneath. It's pretty common to dig down deeper, put some class 5 gravel down there. That'll compact really well. Get it compact because you don't want this sinking, because you're going to be connecting pipes up to it underground. And so this, this is designed to be able to attach a PVC pipe to, or maybe a corrugated pipe to this. Could do it both ways. This one has a plug on this side that can be popped out. So these can be used to collect the water and then divert it underground. You can also use these in rain gardens as an overflow if you're going to divert water elsewhere. If you have a smaller rain garden, well, you need to add on a little bit of a standpipe onto it.
What does PVC stand for?
Polyvinyl chloride? Yeah, it's related to the chemical used to make it.
One of the things with that, it gets really brittle if it's in the sun. So if you're putting that white stuff and you're exposing it in the high sun, it's going to crack over 10 or 15 years, my experience. Like if you use 5-gallon buckets and they're sitting in the sun over a couple of years, they crack out real easy. The sun degrades plastic.
Usually we're getting them buried underground, but they are using materials above here, so that would be a consideration. Here's a French drain. Maybe I can draw that some more. So, here's that cross section that it's showing. You got a pipe down here, and there's rock in it. The one thing it's not showing is it's very common to use fabric in here to keep finer soil from plugging all this up. So a lot of times you'll have fabric all the way up around this. It's that burrito concept again. You're wrapping all works with fabric. And so these are linear things that So you're digging a trench through your lawn. On either side is going to be your lawn. You're digging down, and then that pipe is going to extend out along here. Pretty common to use corrugated pipe that has holes in it at the base. And it's just a way to convey water. Sometimes you'll have houses that don't have any gutters on them, and you'll have that water just come right off the house. This can be a way to collect that water, because you'll have this trench running along there. The water will go into this trench, go into the pipe, and then you can direct that down to a rain garden.
So if you were using a catch basin and you're putting it underneath, and could that be like connected to a French drain to convey the water away, or would you not call that a French drain?
Yeah, you could use this. You could, well, it's pretty common just to hook a pipe up to these and just divert it out.
Yeah. But if the downspout's in the middle of the house and you have to get it away, like half the length of the house, you need something pretty.
Yeah, you're gonna want something that's gonna move it away pretty quickly, and so you can do a combination of this. And you could have the pipe running out along here, and so you could have a French drain running along there. The only thing is, if you have a lot of volume coming down here and going into this, and so you're probably not going to want a perforated pipe right away, because you're going to be losing that water in some cases as it moves along your foundation. And so what this is designed to do is collect, usually they're putting these in along the edges of houses where they have moisture issues, and they want to get that water away that is falling on the side of the house. Yeah. And so this will get most of that water away. It won't get all of it, but it's going to help move it away. And you can have stretches where it's perforated, maybe stretches that are solid, based on where you're having the water issue and how you're trying to get it away from the house.
Is that like a good solution if there's the house on the hill and then the house below it? The water drains down, could you put kind of on the bottom of where the incline is, or the hill is, run a French drain out to the front?
Yeah, definitely. Because you can collect the overland flow. You might want to try to keep pretty large rock up on top so that it'll go in fast. And so that would collect the overland flow and go in. If there were concerns that it was too close to a foundation, then you could even use a liner down here and just run that liner all the way along so that it will just keep moving that water away from that foundation.
Well, except I guess the reason I'm asking, so the top is my neighbor's house, the bottom is my house. So I can't put rock on the bottom, but I could put a drain on the bottom.
You mean you can't put rock on the bottom?
Oh wait, I could put rock on top of the drain, but it can't be at the top of the hill, it has to be at the bottom.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
That's fine. But if it's too close to your foundation,
yeah,
then I might line it with a plastic or pond liner.
Okay.
Just overlap it like shingles as you go along. Because you could get a pretty long strip of that too, but it may get expensive if you get a really good piece.
So does French drain, does that term always mean that the whole thing is all rock on top of this pipe? That's what.
Yeah, typically these are called French drains. There's other like pools dug where there's rock, like to inject water in. Those are sometimes called French drains. French drains are associated with rock.
I think I've been using that term.
Yeah, it gets used in different ways. I'm gonna speed up a little bit because we're down to 20 minutes, but this is showing a cross section of a swale, and that's just kind of like a ditch or a rock channel. So there's different designs or different sections that are drawn for these types of things. If this was given to a designer, this would be kind of the thing that we'd be drawing up. Different examples of rock waterways. Here's one of those catch basins. These are available. I think Hedberg's has these. Probably Home Depot has some. This would be getting a diamond saw, marking your line, your width that you need, cutting across. But this is assuming that you have a pitch where you can direct it one direction. If you have a crowned driveway, it's not going to work. You need it pretty flat and pitched one direction for these to work, but it can be a great way to intercept all that driveway water and get it over to a rain garden.
But could you, if you had it crowned, couldn't you angle it so that one end would be downhill of the other end?
Yeah, you might be able to do that.
Okay.
You know, if it's really rounded, I think it'd be tricky.
Yeah.
But if it's like
And you
pretty
can do it
angular,
then.
yeah, you could do a V.
Oh.
And this will give a little bit, so you might be able to kind of make that work. So we talked about those. Chipmunks love going in these pipes and plugging them up. They're different rodents, so you need some kind of plug on these. So you can pass those around. Those are different examples. If anybody wants to look at this,
What's the purpose of outstrom grate?
atrium grate, you know, it's just a different type of plug being put on the end to keep rodents going in.
Okay.
So it's, you know, that's the main purpose of them. So here's a section of that catch basin and the pipe coming off. You want that downspout really close to it so it's going to collect in there quickly. Here's another picture of that downspout with the pipe coming up. This one we had a lot of discussion about this design because we think ideally it's better to have it outlet on the side of the rain garden rather than coming up, because you could have some icing issues in the spring because it's not going to be below the frost line. You have to get about 3 feet or more below the ground to get below the frost line. So if you do have water, it could plug it for a while in the spring. You can put pipes under driveways or walkways, or using a hose to kind of work this one in and pound it. Now, my only concern with doing a lot of underground piping is ice issues in the spring. So my preference usually is to try to get above ground flow going, unless you can make it a really simple system where you get the water down into a rain garden and you're sure that you can kind of get it to flow out well in the spring into the rain garden. So that gets us to plant selection, and I think we have like 50 slides here, so I'm going to be going through here a little quickly. I think one thing we asked you to do was to bring a species list for a rain garden, or just make one up of species that you like to use, and if you don't have that, that's fine. But as you go through, you might want to make a list of plants that you think would work well in gardens that you're working on, or that you just want to keep track of in the future for rain garden design. And I'll be talking about the characteristics of different plants as we go through. And again, we do summarize a lot of plant information in here if you have a copy of that book. Yeah, I did mention that at the beginning.
Did you get one of the books?
So I worked out a lot of
I
the
handed
plant
them out last
information.
class.
I know I missed 2 sessions.
It's a great,
So-
great book.
Oh, I missed a lot.
Oh, we really did. It's
I wanted
a
to
great-
start off with why we focus as much as we do on native plants. One is that particularly the prairie plants have very deep root systems. There's research showing that they will increase the infiltration rate of rain gardens over time. As these roots go down, they create channels, and water can follow those channels down into the ground. They also add more organic material in the soil, and that helps with water holding capacity of the soil. So there's a lot of benefits with infiltration, but then also, you know, we talked about pollinators can have a big benefit for native pollinators. A lot of our non-native species aren't used by our native pollinators, or we have a lot of varieties of plants that have been bred for certain traits, but it tends to take away from the amount of pollen that they'll produce. So the plants are kind of shifting their resources to variegated leaves or growing bigger, maybe not as much to the pollen production. so that's another concern.
Or nectar production, which is
Yeah. Or
important
nectar,
for
that's
attracting
right.
Is that available like as a poster or something so that
Oh,
it would
yeah, I got
actually be
posters.
We
legible?
have it in something else.
Yeah, this one.
I know, but it's, I mean,
If you search for that on the
Saw
internet,
this on the-
type in roots of native prairie plants or prairie roots or something, you'll find this. You know, just do like a Google search and click on images, and this will come up because this shows up in lots and lots of places. You know, and here it has the depth on the side. Here's 10 feet here. So you can see that most of these are getting down to about 10 feet. And this is a combination of prairie grasses like Indian grass. There's cone flowers in here. I think this is a bush clover. You know, there's a lot of the real common things that we're using, Liatris. And so there, you know, definitely a lot of benefits there. This graphic shows Twin Cities area. Rusty showed you this. So, you know, shows the original plant communities. What's considered intact still. It's very small. So we'll get into plant selection. And there are a lot of different considerations with plants, and there's a lot of personal preference when it comes to plants. But moisture levels is important for rain gardens. Sun and shade is also very important. And then essentially this is how I organize the slides is by, well, first we'll go through plants we'll go through trees and shrubs, and then we'll go into plants that like sun and plants that like shade, and they'll go by moisture conditions. But soil drainage, pH, nutrient value can all be important. Trying to get blooms through the season. Height and width, the blooms through the season can be important for pollinators. Height and width, wildlife value, and then whether they're available someplace can all be considerations.
So is moisture variance, explain that a little bit.
We'll look at that next, because we have some cross sections of a rain garden that's in the book. And so here we talked about having 3 zones. And we have the lower zone where plants that are considered wet meadow plants, plants that grow in wetland meadows, not really, you know, plants that grow in open water. These are plants that grow in saturated kind of moist soil like vervain or Joe Pye weed. There's Joe Pye weed. Blue flag iris can grow down here. So things that like it moist can do well down there. Sedges are another group that we use a lot in that lower area. As we get up further, we use more what we consider mesic prairie or moist prairie plants. Things like cone flowers. If you had a really shady site, you know, here we're showing a stelby. Gaillardia Indian blanket is another prairie plant that kind of likes some moisture, can grow on drier sites. But then there's the outer zone where, especially if it's on a berm, it's going to be relatively dry. It's not going to be getting a lot of moisture up on a berm. So that's where plants like prairie smoke is a prairie plant that can handle really dry conditions. It blooms real early. There's Pennsylvania sedge, which will grow in a real shady area. Doesn't get very tall. Forms little clumps. So these are plants that can handle dry conditions, and so we're talking about those being up on the upper edge. Well, here's Tory vervain that likes it dry. Gray-headed coneflower likes it dry. Butterfly milkweed. So these are all plants that kind of like that upper edge. Don't like pretty dry conditions. So woody plants can definitely work in rain gardens. You know, a lot of people think, well, these have to be flowers and grasses or sedges, and that's not true. Woody plants can work. It just depends on the size of your rain garden. You don't want, if you have a small rain garden, you don't want one shrub filling up the whole thing usually. But dogwood, there are some cultivars that stay smaller. sometimes you'll see really big rain gardens and there will be trees in them, like autumn blaze maple or river birch. Black chokeberry is a shrub that we use a lot because it is a native shrub. It doesn't get really big, and it has edible fruit. Really high antioxidants.
For people or pet,
For people, yeah, but they're pretty tart, so usually people are using them like in a jam or in pies or something like that. But it is a really healthy fruit. Produces a lot of fruit if they're out in the sun.
Service berries, I've heard one that.
Yeah, that would be a really good one as well.
Okay.
You know, I think we might have one coming up. Different nine barks have kind of a different foliage color. They like moisture, so they can do well in rain gardens. Here's black chokeberry again. You can see the blooms in the spring and then the fall color. So it has a lot of desirable characteristics.
But that's in a sunny spot. You won't get that kind of bloom in a shady area.
That's right. And they can get a little leggy in the shade. They can get a little too tall. Cranberry bush. There's compact versions that would work better in a rain garden than the native one, which can get up about 12 feet. So compact cranberry bush would work better. Here's service berries. There's a lot of different kinds of service berries. Regent service berry is one that can work pretty well because it stays smaller. There's one grandiflora that gets bigger that can be nice. I think these look like grandiflora actually, which is a cultivar or a hybrid of two different ones. Dwarf bush honeysuckle, another native shrub. In the sun it gets this bronze color. It's just more dark green in the shade, but can handle shade pretty well. I know you're all trying to write this down.
Yeah.
Try not to go too fast. And then there are different varieties. Here at New England aster, the native one gets up about almost 4 feet tall and can flop over. And so for a smaller rain garden, usually we recommend this purple dome aster, which is a variety. I don't know if there's concern about pollinator use, but I have seen bees on these, and so I think they're using them. They're probably getting enough pollen and nectar off of there.
Are these the ones that are really invasive? Because there's some aster that they planted on the prairie on the sledding hill near our house, and it has found its way. And it's just everywhere. You can't. It's like it's hard to get rid of it.
And usually not too big of a problem, but it can seed in sometimes. Horticultural variety or horticultural plants like daylilies, coral bells, hostas. If you have them in your landscape and you can separate them and move them into a rain garden, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, they may not be providing as much wildlife value, but they can also do a good job of filtering and creating root systems. If you're familiar with daylilies, they get a pretty decent root system. Right. So we'll talk about grasses. Here are different varieties of switchgrass are available. This Shenandoah is one that Rusty likes a lot. Stays upright more than some, and then gets more of a bronze type color.
Is that a sun lover or?
Yeah, likes full sun usually. This is a non-native grass that you see a lot in landscapes, called Forester grass. Another plant that is very upright.
Really beautiful in combination with that aster, that
New England aster?
No, the cultivar.
Oh, the purple dome aster.
Yeah.
Yep. Indian grass. This is a cultivar, more of a bluish color to this one, but Indian grass is a native prairie plant. Little blue stem. This is one that it stays shorter and it stays in a clump, so it's pretty well behaved. Native grass, gets fall color. Side oats grama, another prairie grass. Blue grama, this is one grows really dry, so this would be a good upper edge grass.
So is there a website or something where we can go to and look at the plant and get the different,
Yeah, you know, one place you can go to is the Blue Thumb website. They have a plant selector. It's a Blue Thumb. You know, and we developed this book in partnership with Blue Thumb. And they have a plant selector. So you can put in your site conditions, and then it'll give you plant options. So that's a good place to go. June grass, another short prairie grass. Likes it really dry. Prairie drop seed, another short prairie grass, so likes it dry. This one stays in a neat clump, so you know designers like this one because you can create more structure within plantings with it. Good edging plant. And then we'll move on to flowers. Again, we're going from wet to dry. So we'll start with ones that are commonly used in rain gardens that like wet conditions. So we'll start with blue flag iris, Joe Pyeweed. There are different cultivars of this. Sometimes this can get pretty large, and so that's a consideration. There's actually another variety that gets up about this tall, a woodland variety. So you really need to check out the height of how tall they're going to get. Some of the newer cultivars don't get quite as tall, but it can be a good pollinator.
There's a
plant.
dwarf variety too, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a newer dwarf one. So it's used a lot, I think, for rain gardens. Jacob's Ladder, woodland plant. It's blooming about this time of year. You might see it in some woodland areas around the city. Wild blue indigo, one of my favorite plants. It does get kind of big and bushy. It's a legume, so it'll add nitrogen into the soil. But it gets very vibrant flowers. There's white and pale versions of this, different species. Actually, the white and the pale ones are more native to this area. Black-eyed Suzanne. This one is it's a perennial.
Careful with that one. It seeds itself. It's just prolific.
It does. We have this at home, and it's spread out.
You find it everywhere, don't you?
And then sometimes people have trouble with this because you'll see it planted in large masses, but it's prone to getting fungal diseases because it doesn't get enough airflow going through because it gets so dense.
And then it's ugly.
But it's native, right?
It's native more to Illinois and further south. We have a Rudbeckia hirta, which is our one that's more native here, but it doesn't live as long. It doesn't last as long as this one does. Blazing stars. There's a bunch of blazing stars. This one, which is a meadow blazing star, really attracts butterflies or monarchs for some reason. More so than others. The other ones will attract them as well, but this one just seems like a magnet, which just draws them in. And monarch populations have been declining, and so we're looking for ways to support them as well. So these plants can be important for that. Looks like we're down to 2 minutes or 3, so I'll keep moving along here. Silky aster, shorter aster grows in drier conditions. Salvia, non-native species, but you see this in a lot of places around.
Red salvia, I think.
Yeah, and that's really nice. Blooms for a long time. Different penstemons. They get a long tubular type flower. Different foliage colors, and so you can get more variety within your plantings using some of these species. Butterfly milkweed, I think we looked at. Native milkweed plant. Yarrow. Coreopsis. There's native ones and horticultural varieties. Purple prairie clover. A native legume, so this will add nitrogen into soils too if we have low nitrogen. Prairie smoke we looked at. Sedums, particularly in rock areas, they can work well. Spiderwort. Purple coneflower. There's a pale purple coneflower and a narrow leaf coneflower as well, so there's different coneflowers.
And there's lots more cultivars of those in recent years.
Different flower colors with these.
Yeah.
Yep. Russian sage, rattlesnake master, interesting seed head native plant. Yellow coneflower can handle really dry conditions. Wild ginger for shade. Good ground cover for shady areas. Monarda pistulosa or bee balm. Very good pollinator species, native plant. It can spread underground, so it can be a little aggressive sometimes.
And receding.
Yeah, it'll move around. Wild geranium, a woodland plant, stays lower. Coral bells. Different sedges, they can grow well in shady conditions. And then there's rushes, which grow in moist areas. See some of these stay in a nice tight clump, so those can be good for design. Sensitive fern, blue lobelia, can be good in partial shade.
So these are pretty much nocturnal plants, almost, in a sense.
You mean as far as
like,
blooming more at night?
Yeah, or not, I mean, the shade plants under the...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the sensitive fern likes shade, does really well in shade. This one does well in shade. Turtlehead does well in shade as well.
I like that one.
Gets up pretty tall, so sometimes needs some support to keep it upright. Nice flowers. Different hostas, astelbe, Solomon seal, bleeding heart, maidenhair fern, would grow in really dry portions. Columbine, shady and dry again. Lady fern, very versatile fern.
Oh, nice.
So I think that got us through the plants anyway. And very common that we group plants together so it looks organized. And so there are different ways to kind of approach design. So I think we'll stop it there. I can maybe be doing another one on maintenance, so I might show some more design examples. Because we didn't really get to a lot of design examples, so we'll go through some of that next time, I think, and then get into the maintenance.
Thank
So
you.
thank you everyone.